You don't need a luxury kitchen to prepare gourmet meals. I wanted a little on the sticky side. With a modest kitchen and some standard equipment, you can cook food that you would be proud to serve. There is my shrimp. All you need is a few helpful kitchen techniques, the ability to follow a recipe, a passion for food, and a fascination with cooking. Just follow along the rib cage. That is so good. My name is Dennis. I really do live in a mobile home, in a trailer park, and this is my kitchen. Recently, a fan of the website, Kurt, had sent me some sad news. He had just heard that Clarissa Dickson Wright had passed away. If you're not familiar with the name, she was one of the stars of the BBC TV cooking series, Two Fat Ladies. The other one, Jennifer Patterson, she had died in 1999. I love those shows. I have them all on DVD. I've watched them many times. I felt like I wanted to do some tribute to them. In one of the TV shows, one of the episodes, Clarissa did a Rabbit Isabel, and it was the episode called the Cambridge 8, which referred to the Cambridge rowing team. I like the recipe, and I thought I want to do that, but I want to do it with something more accessible, because how many people want to buy rabbit? How many people want to eat rabbit? I thought, what about duck? So that's what I want to do today as a tribute. Well, I want to do a duck Isabel recipe. But to start off, first I have to start cooking the wild rice. Wild rice takes quite a while to cook. That is a 1/4 cup of wild rice, which is about 1.5 ounces or 42 grams. And this is 1 cup of water. 237 milliliters, about 240 milliliters. Get that into the water. Wild rice can take as long as 45 minutes to cook. I'm not going to cook it that long. I'm going to go about 30 to 35 minutes because I want it to be a little bit on the chewy side, al dente, because I'm going to use this inside of my duck as kind of a part of the stuffing, and that will give me a better texture. Meanwhile, I've been thawing a duck. This is about a 5-pound duck, 2¼ roughly kilograms. You pull out of the inside, there's usually the neck and the gizzards in there. There's always a big flap of neck skin on the duck. I don't need to pull that off yet. It's going to come off when I remove the skin. What I'm going to do, and you've seen me do this many times with chickens, is I'm going to fillet off the meat and just use the meat to make my dish here. I have to first pop the wings out, and in a duck, the wings are in there a little bit tighter than on a chicken, but much easier to remove than on a goose. I've done it on a goose and a turkey, and they're tough to remove there. So there's one of the wings off. All right, and then to remove the skin, I'm going to slit right down one side, turn it over, and then slit down the other side, down the middle of the breast. And I put a big cut in the breast meat, but it's not going to really matter in this dish because everything is going to be covered later on. I'm going to try to get this off without damaging the breast meat too much. I'm trying to be as careful as possible cutting this skin off because I want to try to do this without damaging the meat too much. Everything is going into a bowl here, and that's going to be saved for stock later on. If you're not familiar with the flavor of duck, it's richer and it's all dark meat, because unlike chickens and turkeys, duck and geese, which are also all dark meat, those birds fly. And the flying birds have the breast meat as dark meat. Okay, this is a little bit tricky down here. I've done this a lot of times with chicken, so I know where the pieces are and where the joint is. Trying to pop the joint here. There it goes. Once you pop the joint, it's a lot easier to start cutting down through the soft part of the joint. All right, once I get down to this point, it's easier to just pull the skin off, if it'll come off. There we go, like that. Again, if you damage the meat, it's not going to matter. I'm looking for where the joint is. It should be right in there. And there it is. Exposing the joint makes it a lot easier to cut down and separate the drumstick from the thigh meat. You don't have to cut through any bone. The joint is easy to cut through. Okay. So there's, trim that. There is the thigh meat from one of the legs. There's always a bit of the joint that stays attached. Trim that up a little bit. Okay. Boneless thigh meat. It seems like a lot of work, but I've done this so many times, I'm comfortable doing it. Usually I do it with chicken. In fact, I usually only ever buy whole chicken because I want the trim, because I use a lot of chicken stock, especially in winter when I'm making soup. It's good for making risotto. In fact, I just heard from one of the fans who just made a risotto. I'll have to write to her and ask her what she used for liquid. I believe she said she made an asparagus risotto, which sounds interesting. I've never tried that. Okay, there is the boneless drumstick meat. Okay, now the breast meat. There's a breastbone that runs down the center, and sticking up here is what they call the keel. It's a piece of bone that sticks up. So you go all the way down to the rib cage, and then when you get down there toward the front, you'll feel in there the wishbone or collarbone, clavicle. Get underneath it. Just kind of cut right along the wishbone, not too deep, because then you can get underneath it to get the meat out that's underneath it. And then once you do that, you just follow along the rib cage. Separate the meat from along the ribs. You butchers out there are probably laughing because you can do this in seconds, and it takes me like 20-30 minutes. Piece of breast meat. That's a lot of work, I agree. But for what I have planned, it's what I have to do. There's my other beautiful piece of breast meat. Next, I need to cut up an onion, and I need about half of this onion. This is kind of a medium large onion. You need about 5 ounces, 140 grams. So I'm going to use only about half of this. Get those roots off. They always get in the way. Save that for later. And I want to dice this, kind of give it a medium dice after I get this skin off, which is really tight on there. There, that loosens it up. Sometimes you have to give it a little bit of persuasion. It's a thick, tight skin on this one. Okay. Wipe off some of that onion stuff. I'm going to cut this in half again, leaving the root on to hold everything together. Just put a couple of slits in, flip it, do it again. This is the safe way to cut an onion up. Then cut across. My rice, by the way, is done. So I took that off the heat, left the lid on. I cooked it for 30 minutes. I can let that cool down a little bit. Now that I have my onion diced, I want to saute this. I love onion and sage together in stuffing. I just think the two flavors go together perfectly, and that's why it's traditional to use sage and onion in stuffing. So I got to saute that until this is just lightly cooked. I'm heating a skillet on the stove here, into which I'm going to put a small amount of oil. Barely a tablespoon there. I don't want a lot of oil in this. And then there go my onions in there. And I'm just going to cook these onions over medium-high heat, 5 to 6 minutes, just until they're tender and translucent. I want to cut up the leg meat to put in the food processor. So I'm going to take these breast pieces off and set those aside. And this meat will go through the food processor better and break up if I cut it into strips, or I'm going to trim some of this fat off. You can cut it into strips or little cubes, whatever. I just know it'll break up better in the food processor if it's not in large, big pieces. I don't want to grind it up too small. I'm not making a pate. I want it to be about the texture of like ground beef. You've seen the hamburger. That's about what I'm aiming for. And this will comprise the filling for my duck Isabel. It's kind of like a meat stuffing. I have my food processor set up, and I'm going to put some basil leaves in there. I have some fresh basil that I've been keeping alive and healthy by keeping it in water. Yes, that's a motorcycle going by. And then I have some sage. I'm going to put I don't know, 8 or 10 sage leaves in there. I think I mentioned earlier that I love onion and sage in stuffing. Okay. Then I want to put my pieces of meat in there. And I want to chop that up until it's just chopped, as I mentioned, like ground beef. That looks good. I don't want to reduce that to a pate, but I do want to chop that up well. So there is my chopped duck meat. I transferred my duck meat now to a bowl. This is pork sausage. You can buy this. This is the regular. You can buy this by the chub. This is a 1 pound chub. I've already used up part of it. So I'm going to put about a quarter of it in there. That's about 4 ounces. 113 grams of pork sausage meat. There are my onions that I cooked earlier. Here is the brown rice, the wild rice that I cooked earlier. And I want to just mix this up to start off. That is looking good already. I've still got a ways to go. All right. I want to put a good pinch of salt in there. And see if I can do this without getting the handle too dirty. Going to grind some black pepper in there. And I did not cut a hole through my glove. And I want to put 1 egg in there. I need this because it makes too much noise. There, that's better. The egg will act as a binder. And see, that's a little bit too moist. I'm using large eggs. Just 1 egg, but it's still, I think, too much moisture. So I'm going to put about a tablespoon maybe of breadcrumbs in there. If you use a medium or a small egg, you may not need to use breadcrumbs. I just want this to be able to hold a shape. Okay, so that's probably a couple of tablespoons of panko breadcrumbs. And that should dry it up once it starts absorbing moisture. Okay, already I'm starting to feel that getting sticky. See how that's starting to hold shape? I like that. So that's my stuffing. That is ready now. I'm ready to start assembling my duck Isabel. Okay, here's where I go a little over the top. This is kitchen twine. I do this for my Tuscan meatloaf, which I've made plenty of times. I'm laying down some pieces of twine that I'm going to use for tying up my loaf. I have some prosciutto here. The trick with buying this prosciutto is hopefully you can get prosciutto that it'll stay together, it won't break up. And that is coming apart very nicely. I let this come up to room temperature. Tore a little bit at the end there, but that's okay. Lay the piece down, and then I'm going to peel this plastic off. I'm doing this on parchment paper. I thought it might be easier to work with. Another slice. And again, I don't care if it tears a little bit down there on the end because I'm going to overlap it. The tearing won't matter. Okay, another one. Okay, so I'm going to cut one piece in half. With a pair of kitchen scissors. I'm going to patch this right now because I just know it works so much nicer if you get these holes patched. It's okay if it's a little bit thick with prosciutto in places. I love the flavor of prosciutto. There, that'll patch those 2 holes that I created. And then I want piece on either end. So one up there, and I overlap them. Hopefully you saw that. So that each of the slices, they overlap in the middle, but they also overlap each other. Now what I want to do is I want to put one of my pieces of breast meat on there, and then put my filling in the middle. And this has gotten even a little bit stiffer as those breadcrumbs in there absorbed some moisture. Shape that into a loaf. That's why I needed it to hold a shape. I need to rinse my hands before I continue, and then put the other piece of breast meat on top. I want to bring up the ends first. And then the sides. Okay, and then start tying this together with these strings. You don't want to pull these too tight because they will cut through the prosciutto. Just snug them up. In the meantime, I'm heating my oven up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 177 degrees Celsius. Then my two end pieces. Just pull them in snug and tie it off. All right, I'm ready to start browning my loaf here. I'm heating my skillet. I gave it a wipe. Hopefully you can tell that it's off center because I got a trick that I'm going to do here. Again, some of my cooking olive oil, about a tablespoon maybe. I call it cooking olive oil. It's not extra virgin olive oil because I don't want it to smoke. And then I'm going to lay my meat in there and slide it up against the edge of the pan. I'm hoping that rounded edge is going to seal that edge of that loaf and give me a nicer shape. I need to brown this all the way around on all sides. I can do the same thing on the ends and try to get that to be as rounded a shape and as cleanly shaped as possible. This will really hold my loaf together. So there is my roast now. You can see that by frying it the way I did, I tightened up many of those loose flaps. I'm going to leave that roast tied. I'm opening a bottle of white wine here, and I'm going to put a good quarter to a third, maybe even a half a cup of white wine in the bottom of this. I'm going to put the lid on this. As I said, I heated my oven up to 350 degrees. That's about 177 Celsius. And I'm going to bake this until I get an internal temperature up to about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Tested with a meat thermometer. That's about 71 degrees Celsius. I'm estimating that's going to take 50 to 60 minutes. My duck Isabel has come out of the oven. It roasted for exactly 1 hour, and that brought it up to 157 degrees. Resting, it'll come up another 5 or 10 degrees. I want to show you a trick that I like to do when I'm making a sauce. If I want to make a quick sauce, I've got a little pan there. I'm going to put a strainer over it. This is the drippings, the wine and drippings from my pot. Strain that. And this is plum sauce. Find this in the Oriental section of some most grocery stores. Put in a good heaping teaspoon or two. I'm going to use a rubber spatula to blend that. It adds a little bit of a complexity to that sauce, a sweetness and another flavor to those drippings rather. And I don't think this will need any salt, but just in case. No salt. That is ready. I'm going to set that aside. And here is my roast. I'm going to start removing some of these strings here. I don't need to untie this completely, but enough so that I can start carving. And then I need to get a plate. So to slice this, I'm going to take this end piece off and set that aside because I want one of the center pieces. This will feed easily 6 to 8 people. Keep that together. I think I'm going to put a second piece on that plate. More is better. There we are. Ah, that looks wonderful. And then here is the sauce that I just made. Beautiful. And then what I did was, as a side dish, I sauteed some green beans because I love green beans, and I dressed those up with some sesame seeds. Oops. Gotta make a mess. That's what cooking is all about. And there it is. The last step is to see how good that tastes. So there we are, my duck Isabel, in tribute to Jennifer Patterson and Clarissa Dickson Wright of Two Fat Ladies fame. First I want to taste my duck meat. Tender. I was afraid that might overcook. It didn't. It's tender. And this is my filling. Oh, that is a wonderful flavor. And finally, my green beans. I don't know if you can hear that through the microphone. I can hear it through the bones in my head. Crisp, tender, so excuse me. I'm going to go enjoy my duck Isabel. For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit the White Trash Cooking website and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.